Welcome back, tuning into this morning's video. Just a quick Sunday morning update to say that things are getting a little bit interesting in terms of forecast for the temperatures over the stratosphere in the North Pole, particularly around Greenland, in the coming couple of weeks. I'll show you all the detail on that in a moment. Before I get on with the video, I just want to talk about the advertisements, video ads on all my pages at gavsweathervids.com. If you press play on the video ad, you'll be supporting gavsweathervids.com, and thanks very much for doing that. So this is the current situation in terms of the stratospheric temperature over the Arctic, over the North Pole at, let's just take a look at where it is, 30 HPA. That's an area in the atmosphere high up over the North Pole. And I showed you this the other day, with virtually as cold as you can get in terms of the stratosphere at the moment. The grey line is where we should be at this time of the year. It is a very cold time anyway at this time of the year in the stratosphere over the North Pole. But the black line is where we are, and we're virtually off the scale, we're virtually off the chart there with the stratospheric temperature at the moment. So it's really, really cold, virtually record-breakingly cold, at around minus 90 degrees in the upper atmosphere over the North Pole. Now, when you get a very cold stratosphere over the Arctic, it's one of the things that goes with low pressure over the North Pole and around Iceland and Greenland, a strong polar vortex, and consequently strengthening the westerlies through the mid-latitudes. And that's very much what we've been seeing through this December. We've seen a very active westerly sort of month, quite a mild month. It's going to be milder than average December, but very wet and windy, stormy conditions. Now, when we get warming over the North Pole in terms of the stratosphere, that can sometimes correlate to increased risk of blocking. You weaken the polar vortex and you start to bring colder air out of the Arctic into the mid-latitudes from the east and from the northeast at times as well. It's not a guarantee, but it is one of the things that does seem to coincide with an increased risk of blocking over the North Pole. So let's have a look at the temperature forecast for the stratosphere in terms of the Arctic over the coming couple of weeks. It's actually going to start on the 6th of January. So just over a week away, and what we're looking at is the yellow colours. Where we've got the yellow colours, that's showing us where we've got warming beginning to develop in the stratosphere, and we do see some warming by the 6th of January heading on to the Asian side of the Arctic. Now, this is the southern stratospheric warming. Southern stratospheric warming is a much more dramatic, much more pronounced, quicker warming that occurs in the Arctic, in the stratosphere over the Arctic, very, very quickly. This is a minor warming, but it's enough to nibble away at the cold stratosphere, at the polar vortex, really, that's locked in over the North Pole. As we run through these charts, what I want you to keep an eye on is what's going on around here at this point. Once we get through to around the 10th of January, we're starting to see warming beginning to occur around Canada, particularly around Newfoundland, and just starting to push up towards Greenland. Now, again, this isn't a sudden stratospheric warming, but it is quite a significant warming occurring around Newfoundland and around Canada, and beginning to head towards Greenland. And as we move through, we see that over time, getting a long way away, of course, this is taking us through to the 14th of January, through to the middle of the month, but we do see over time that warming really becomes quite pronounced around Greenland. Now, Greenland is where we've got the core of the polar vortex just at the moment, generating these deep stormy areas of low pressure that's throwing weather systems and severe gales across the Atlantic into Europe. Now, if we get this warming occurring over Greenland, it's quite possible that whilst it may not be enough to destroy the polar vortex, to get rid of it entirely, it may well be enough to knock it off its perch, at least for a time, and this could well be a precursor to a colder spell of weather coming along in the middle and latter stages of January. Now, I don't want to go too over the top with this just yet, because one, it isn't a sudden stratospheric warming. That has to be much more pronounced, and basically these colours have to turn sort of orange and red for it to be a sudden stratospheric warming. If that was to occur over Greenland, that would be really, really significant. But this isn't a sudden stratospheric warming. It's a warming that's occurring around Canada and heading off into Greenland. As I say, it's probably not enough to knock the polar vortex completely out. It probably won't destroy it, but it could well sort of push it around and maybe send it over towards the Pacific side or towards Scandinavia for a time and bring some much colder weather in. But it's a long way off. This is the middle of January, so we've got to monitor this really and see whether it does indeed occur, and then see what the implications are. And of course, it is possible that this, because it's so far away, this will either be downgraded or it could be upgraded. It could eventually finish up that this is the start of a sudden stratospheric warming. We'd need to go on a few days after this before we could be sure that it is. And I don't think it will be a sudden stratospheric warming. I don't think it'll be as dramatic as that, but it could be enough to start just changing the pattern a little bit. Let's see what the GFS, but from the GFS model, by the way, let's see what the GFS model is showing in terms of the actual weather charts through this period where this warming is beginning to occur in the stratosphere around Canada and going up to Greenland. Here we are on the 6th of January, Monday the 6th of January, 192 hours away, still with the same old pattern from December. Deep area of low pressure, 940 millibars off the western coast of Scotland. Gales sweeping across the Atlantic, severe gales up in the north. It's the same old, stormy, wild and Atlantic-driven weather. Now, as we move through to Wednesday the 8th, which is 10 days away, still no real change in the pattern. Low pressure is driving the pattern to the north of Scotland. Westerly winds blasting in across the Atlantic, no significant difference. As we get through towards Friday the 10th, things do start changing a little bit. We're starting to get this ridge developing around Newfoundland. That could well be in response to the warming that's going on in the stratosphere around Newfoundland at this time. We're also building a bit of a ridge up across Spain and Portugal and into France, and we're between those two ridges, one around Newfoundland and one across Spain, still under low pressure, so it's still very unsettled. It's probably turning quite mild actually initially from the southwest. As we go beyond that, and going a long way out now, we're going to 384 hours away, and this is the time frame where the GFS model is seeing that warming occurring around Greenland. Well, then things are getting interesting. We're beginning to get a bit of a ridge developing there through the mid-Atlantic, going up to Iceland and heading off to Greenland. The low pressure is sitting over top of the British Isles, so it's still very unsettled, but we're beginning to show signs of starting to pull colder air in from the north or the northeast. Now, I'm not sure if the response to that warming around Canada, around Newfoundland and Greenland, I'm not sure if the response would be that quick. It could be that quick, but it could be a few, say a week or so beyond this before we see much of a response. But it's interesting that around the time frame that the GFS model is seeing that warming in the stratosphere around Newfoundland and Greenland, it's also starting to see the pattern beginning to change, and we're starting to see much more in the way of ridging there developing around Greenland and Iceland by the 14th of January. 384 hours away, so it's a long way out. Don't take it too seriously at all. We've got to see whether this warming is going to occur, and then we've got to firm up on what the response to the warming could be. Having a look at the E7WF 10-day chart, no great changes there. Low pressure is continuing to dominate in the Atlantic. Maybe signs of a little bit of ridging going on through the mid-Atlantic, but I think that's just before the time frame that we're interested in anyway, to be honest. And then finally have a look at the GEM, the Canadian model, and well, by day 10, which is the 8th of January, it is starting to see signs of a little bit of ridging occurring through the Atlantic. We've also got a bit of high pressure appearing over the Arctic, and winds are trying to get round into a colder northerly sort of direction, but certainly nothing definitive, nothing definite that you could pin down there and say, yeah, the pattern is changing. But I think it is quite significant this morning that we are seeing that warming in the stratosphere occurring around Newfoundland, around Canada, and going up towards Greenland. If it does occur, I think it will be enough, at the very least, to change the pattern for a while. It may not totally knock out the polar vortex. I think we would need a sudden stratospheric warming for that. But because it's occurring around Greenland, which is where the core of the polar vortex is this year, because it's occurring there, it would, I think, be enough to significantly change the pattern, at least for time, and possibly bring us some much colder weather. And the UK Met Office yesterday, they did their longer range update, and quite interestingly they started to put in a caveat that late January could turn significantly colder, and I suspect they're beginning to see the chances of this warming occurring around Newfoundland, around Greenland. That could really change the pattern. Of course, the JMA model, the long-range JMA, but I've been monitoring weekly, has been indicating the chance of a colder spell coming along through January. And I've been saying, I said a couple of weeks ago, that I think there's a lot more of this winter still to play out, that we haven't really even started it yet, and I still sort of maintain that. I think there could well be a lot more to this winter once we get through to the latter stages of it. So things could well be starting to get very interesting now. Obviously, I'll keep monitoring it. We'll do more updates over the next few weeks, see where this is going. But quite interesting developments this morning if you're looking for a change to this stormy weather and some colder conditions. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.